Hey guys, welcome back. This is the second video of the chakra series. Today we're going to cover the Sacral Chakra. So this is located at your sacral center, near your sacrum and your hips, and basically this entire space right below your navel, really, and above the root chakra. And to me, when I sense this area in people when I'm working on them, it always feels much bigger than even the root chakra. Perhaps for you it might be different, but I just thought size-wise, it really stands out to me as a very strong power center. It really radiates this healing energy that's palpable, because this is the center that if you were to give it a statement, it would say, I feel. So everything that you're feeling and running as far as being able to sense everyone's energy out in the world, this is the center that derives from. So for many of us who feel quite sensitive, this is the very active chakra space. Now, this is also the chakra that governs your sexuality, your pleasure, your creativity. It's your healing center. So there's a lot of different things we could get into about the second chakra, but I'll try to keep it short and sweet. The biggest, most important piece about the sacral chakra is the fact that this is really where your kundalini energy stimulates itself. So because it's a center of creativity, now if we look at how that is a medical or more physical description, it would be like, this is the center where we create life from, right? So if we're not creating a life, meaning we're not birthing a child into the world or helping create a child, then this center has this abundance of creative energy that can be manifested in different ways. So this isn't just about being able to physically support a human. This is also about how we choose to create in the world, and how that relates to healing energy comes back full circle to the kundalini activation. Now, what is kundalini? Well, that's a really fancy term that was derived from yogi eras, and it really is just a simple way of describing this activated rush of energy that accumulates in your sacral center, kind of runs down into your root, because I see it loop down there as well. There's some different interpretations of it. If you look on different reference handbooks, it really only talks about from the second upward, but I actually see a tiny bit go down and really shoot down, but most of it does channel up. So it's kind of like this fountain effect. And what happens is when you are looking to heal yourself, or you're around people that need healing, or perhaps you're really going through some sort of like emotional experience, then what you might discover is a type of really hot sensation or a really cold sensation, sometimes both, and sometimes they follow each other in kind of these extremes. And so we've learned to identify that experience as a validation that your kundalini energy has activated itself. And really this is just your body's natural program on how it uses energy to really purify and blast through your energy centers. So what'll happen is it'll get really hot in that center, and it'll kind of stimulate the chakra, and then it boils up into the throat chakra, where it kind of gets activated again, because really the sacral chakra and the throat chakra have a lot in common. The way they're shaped and the way they communicate together, they're very interconnected. They're almost like, you could say, like different twins that aren't identical, but they're very close. And so the way that we can approach just differentiating between the different chakras is thinking about the second chakra being deeply connected to also your throat chakra, which is how you choose to express yourself in the world, how you give yourself a voice, and how even just from like perhaps a female kind of genitalia description, the shape of it is actually very similar to the way the throat is shaped. So I find that really fascinating. Not that men aren't also a part of that as well, but I've just noticed that the way like the uterus and the ovaries are shaped has kind of a similar mapping of how the throat is also designed. And so when we think about it from the way that Kundalini runs up the spine and kind of circulates here and then keeps going up and out your crown, it's almost like you have different activation points, and it's like this fiery essence that just burns through your spine. And of course, it's not just along the spinal column, it's also radiating out to the sides as well, right? So it's kind of like a burning star is how I like to visualize it. So what'll happen is if you play with colors, you might find that this sort of burning star Kundalini activation can be helpful to think of in two different colors. So we've got the red of the fiery, kind of angsty, just like burning everything out, getting it out and purifying. And then we've got the cooling sensation that kind of comes downward. So instead of having this from here up direction, we've now got this cooling sensation that kind of radiates down through the center and circulates. And so it's a loop. It really is a loop. So that's a kind of a short and simple way to describe the Kundalini activation. And the sacral center is really where that is housed. That is the space in which when you go through some type of spiritual awakening, or you just start working with energy and start playing with energy and acknowledging that version of yourself, this is the moment that your Kundalini really kind of gets turned on. Now, let's think about when and where else does this Kundalini get activated? Well, when of course you're doing really deep spiritual work on yourself, but sometimes it happens even when you're in a relationship and you're just relating to someone, or you're passionate about your connection with someone. Another way to think about that is some of the unconscious programming that we have in how we sort of adopt each other's energy fields. And so perhaps there's a bit of some validation that when you spend time with other people, you're kind of sharing this energy field, and in order to maintain that experience, sometimes your Kundalini will activate itself and kind of start clearing out your channels. So it'll purify your space. It'll also return your energy back to you that belongs to you. And then of course we have the very systematic traditional route of Kundalini activation, which really is a lot to do with breath work, the direction of choosing the direction of which your breath is experienced. So you can think about that as instead of having your breath up here in kind of short bursts in the chest, you actually bring it down into the belly, and you have these deep belly breaths. So when you take an inhale, your belly expands itself out, and then the exhale releases. And as you do that, you can create a momentum where you start to visualize and direct the flow of the breath to circulate just like that Kundalini cycle. And what'll happen is it'll activate the Kundalini. So again, this is your body's natural ability, and I'm just going through the variations of moments and experiences and circumstances that kind of create this natural activation. Now, of course, for you, it might be that you go through some kind of growth period and perhaps you just are experiencing a bunch of Kundalini activations. And for you, you may not even know that that's what's happening. What it might translate actually is having hot flashes and cold flashes. And I think for a lot of people that go through like their menopausal transition really are experiencing that, but sometimes they're also experiencing a bit of a Kundalini activation, and they're just, you know, reading what it really is, because we don't really get taught in traditional forms of school what Kundalini is, and the fact that it kicks on the moment that you hit your hormones, and then of course it gets really activated when you start doing energy work. So for me, in my journey, my real Kundalini activation was in breath work and yoga training. So a lot more of the really deep meditations mixed with kind of body movement, and having this visualization of focusing my attention just right on this visualization to where my body started matching it routinely without really the need for me to focus so much. So first you start out kind of training the body, hey, this is how I want you to run. And then the more you do that, the less you need to really like focus intensely on it. You can kind of do it almost like you can be slightly out of your body and doing it at the same time and have the same sort of Kundalini activation experience. So if you're really looking to activate your Kundalini, you can sort of look forward to a purification. You can look forward to activation in all of your chakras. It's definitely something that will invite a huge purge into your life and create a massive transformation. It can also be really wonderful to start bringing in your higher self more into the physical body. So this really bridges the gap between the two. And again, your sacral center, your sacral chakra is really where all of this information and activation is stored. So everybody's different. Every soul is on a different path and different journeys. So for you, you might have had this kind of enormous Kundalini activation when you were doing something that I didn't mention. Maybe you were like swimming or singing or doing something, you know, just what you're passionate about. And that can happen because, again, this house, this second chakra house, is connected to a multitude of human experiences. So we've got creativity, we've got pleasure, we've got healing, we've got money, we've got intimacy. Did I say creativity? So we've got all these things that are activated from this one chakra. And so what's really cool about the chakras is that if you do one thing, like one of those things, like even if you're just focused on money, you're going to notice that your intimacy energy is activated and your emotional energy is activated and your creativity is activated. And that's because these are all getting stimulated as you stimulate that one area of money that's really governed in the second chakra. So everything plays off of each other. Now, if we look at it from the opposite end of that, if you're focused on the lack of money, then you're also going to feel a very similar relationship to lack of intimacy, lack of pleasure, lack of creativity. And maybe that's really just like no motivation or no desire to have those things or to experience those things. Maybe when you go through a period of feeling like you have repressed sexuality, you can also correlate that to perhaps not being able to generate a lot of income or having a lot of struggles with money and maybe having struggles with relationships all at the same time. So this chakra is honestly one of my favorites because it controls so many main things in our life that really matter to us. It really gives us a human experience. And it's not that the other chakras don't have that as well, but for me, this is really a power center because when you feel and you allow yourself to feel and you go through the permission of saying, okay, I'm feeling everything all of the time, like what gives, you know, and you don't have the recognition that your sacral chakra is really wide open, then it feels like you slip into the subconscious kind of shadowy aspect of this chakra, and that could be, I feel like a victim, you know. So this is the chakra point in which you might actually resonate with a chapter of your life where you really got sucked into that space of belief, where it really felt like you were a victim all the time, or it felt like you just didn't have a lot of energy to really generate or create something new. You felt very stuck or very limited. And so, you know, it covers all of those things. It also covers emotions. This is connected to the second layer in your aura, which is your emotional body. And so all of your emotions get generated from this space. And so when we look at feelings and emotions and how it relates to your experience as a human, to me, that's really so much of what this schooling and being in a human body is all about. Is about experience and the feelings that arise through any type of experience, whether it be good or bad. It's just the depth of feeling. Because what I really want to invite you into sitting with today is that when I have conversations with spirit guides that are from higher dimensional places now that they've evolved, they do not have the same depth of feeling ability. So as you evolve into a higher vibrational being, there's no longer the necessary need to have these feeling centers so dramatized, so totally activated. And so one of the really beautiful and unique things about being in a human body is the fact that we still are experiencing this high vibrational energy exchange, and we get to have that coupled with the intense and dramatic and very visceral types of feelings that we get to feel in this vessel. And it's so rare. It's so rare because of how old we are as souls. If you're watching this, you are an old soul. And the amount of lifetimes that we've had really make a difference, because as we choose the depth of lifetimes as a soul, the more willing we become to accept an even greater level, an even deeper level of feeling. So the guides are always pointing me back to this recognition that, one, really honor being in a human body. Feel everything that you can possibly feel. And really the trick there is to allow yourself to feel into the depths without identifying with the emotions that you're feeling. So this is something I wish someone would have taught me when I was younger. This was something I didn't understand until adulthood. But when you're feeling something, sometimes you just are going through the experience of just needing to feel that, and oftentimes it's not even your own feeling. It sometimes just wants to pass through you. And so when we allow ourselves to experience feelings in that way, it becomes much easier to go through that experience of the full range of emotions. Because when we suppress our feeling centers, we really can't navigate our own healing, and we really suppress our own ability to create the reality that we're choosing for ourselves. And we also deny our own personal power. So it's a really dangerous recipe to be subscribing to when we don't allow ourselves to feel. And this is where we see most people in the world right now in a stark contrast. We've got almost like this genre separation of like the feelers and like the mental analytical driven people that don't allow themselves to feel. And very rarely do we come across people that have a bit of both going on, where it's balanced really well. And so when you go through your own experience in spiritual growth, you might discover that really what you're doing is learning how to balance these two things, because one is not better than the other. It's just that some of us come into the world with some of those energy centers activated a bit higher than others. And so it's not that we can't blend and work with it, but we're going to have a hard time seeing eye to eye or really understanding people that are perhaps on the opposite spectrum. And maybe that's a journey for them that they really need to have. But those of us that are really attracted to healing work tend to be people that have a really strong ability to hold beautiful, transformative, healing energy that's really quite on a radical vibration. It's very much like you're here to do amazing, beautiful things just by being who you are. And by being who you are, this is the center that's got to be really activated to really allow that full permission slip of you to be your thriving self rather than in that survival zone. So, like we talked about in the root chakra video, these three lower chakras are very intense as far as the density of information. And even though I would say the root chakra is still the densest, the second chakra follows pretty close, because this is also the center that governs your genetics and your family imprint and any potential religious programming that comes with any of that, or even just from society, growing up in the society that we have. There's a lot of religious programming. There's a lot of genderized programming. There's programming about how that affects our sexuality and this kind of spectrum of what's acceptable and what isn't. And all of these things are fabricated and not really governed in nature. And so what happens is it creates a type of resistance in our space, which then manifests as limitation. And really takes our functioning chakra into a very closed and tight and restricted space, and then we're only really allowing ourselves to have like a limited experience in this body. And of course, you know, ripple effect, the whole body's affected by that. It's not just your sacral chakra. So those are just things to kind of sit with and consider when you think about maybe your own lifestyle choices, and perhaps what that looked like when you were a child, and what your parents believed about their own sexuality and about creativity and pleasure, and whether they allowed themselves to have any of that, whether they were really truly connecting in their relationship with one another. All of these things are imprinted in your body because those were a piece of your experience and kind of your frame of reference. Your parents are always the frame of reference for how you approach even romantic relationships and your love life, and even friendships, how you relate to your friends. This is the sacral chakra is the center for relationships, regardless of whether it's romantic and intimate, or whether it's a friendship, or even with teachers, or how you relate to just seeing other people. So this is how we relate. This is how much we allow ourselves to emote, whether we say, well, emotions are great, but I only like these higher vibrational emotions like love and joy and laughter and play, but I don't allow myself to really feel anger or sadness or depression or frustration or loss or betrayal. You know, all those things that we do to try to protect ourselves from feeling those feelings really is actually preventing us from having the higher vibrational feelings, because you can't really have one without the other. And so the more willing we are to go deep into those deep, dark caves of, okay, I'm gonna like feel into this sadness, and what is this sadness communicating? And I don't have to identify with the sadness. My only job is to really just experience it and to allow it to move through you and pass through you, and sort of sit with anything that it's trying to offer you as a teaching. So I sort of go at this approach with an openness of, you know, okay, if sadness is the emotion, then tears are often flowing, right? And there's sort of this like guttural kind of experience of heaviness that moves through you. It's kind of muddy and thick, and while you're in that experience, you can be simultaneously feeling all of those things, but also sort of opening up your chakras and opening up your energy field to just like sitting with the question of like, what is this here to teach me? Is there anything I need to know? And perhaps what you'll experience is a few brief little nuggets of things coming forward. Perhaps it's an old memory, something from a long time ago. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about something that happened yesterday and this random person. And so those are your body's way of saying, hey, this is really what is connected to that vibrational cord that you're releasing right now through the emotion of sadness. And sometimes, like I was saying earlier, you're feeling an emotion that might not even be yours. It might be collective. Like right now, a lot of us are really processing loss and sadness, and we have been because of the quarantine experience and how much change it's really brought into our lives. We're really mourning the loss of life prior to this because things aren't the same. And so you're processing perhaps your own personal sadness and also this collective sadness, so the intensity is really magnified. And if you were to identify with all of that, you would go way too far into the analytics. So be really aware that while you're sitting with the question, there isn't a need to demand all the factual pieces of it, but more just being almost like observing what the body is sort of giving you as little pieces, and being okay with that, and seeing that that's enough, and that it doesn't need to be this entire chapter book of explanations of all the things that you've been holding space for. So when the body doesn't give you a lot of answers or a lot of communication, it's because it's trying to show you that you don't actually need that information. And perhaps if you did have it, you might slip into a type of judgment which would then prevent you from really fully releasing the energy, because when we judge something, we tend to hold a piece of it, because in some subconscious programming, we have this idea that things are either right or wrong or black or white, but in reality, energy is very neutral. So when we go through something, we have our experience that's very valid, but the moment we slip into judgment about something and really cast that judgment, it actually creates like a hold on the energy, and it doesn't really have a lot of movement. So, you know, one thing to really think about is just that less is more, and if you're experiencing just really visceral feelings and not a lot of details of why, that's brilliant. That's amazing. That's your body saying, hey, look, you're being brave and willing and courageous to just feel what you're feeling, and that is perfect. And we don't need to know what you're really releasing, or why, or where it came from, or who it belongs to, or how long it's been there, or whether it's the collective. It sometimes doesn't matter to know all of those things. And so I just want to simplify this process for you, and so you get to know your own sacral center without being afraid of what you're going to feel and why. And there's an interesting program that gets stuck in our space about feeling, and really what it says is, if I feel this thing, like let's say it's sadness or grief, because grief I feel like is a bit heavier than sadness even. If I feel my grief, then I will create more grief, or I will get stuck in the grief and I won't know how to get out. So those are the two kind of programs that run in our bodies that have been cast upon us in this society experience, because society says, here's all the beautiful, happy, everyone should be happy all the time. It's not really acceptable in our societal makeup to be willing to really feel the depth of these other aspects. So we tend to shy away from them, and we end up missing out on these really blissful and ecstatic and joyful energies, because again, we can't have one without the other. So they really, you really have to be willing to dive deep into both and know that there's a reward on the other side, because the more you are willing to feel those things, the body gets reprogrammed, and the body goes, oh look, I didn't get stuck in the grief. Oh look, I didn't create more grief. I actually created a relief. I feel better. I feel like I released something. I feel lighter. I feel like there's movement. And so it's really important to play with this feeling and go deep into it, so that way the body can find its new groove in allowing this to come up whenever it's presently showing up in your life. So oftentimes we really take a toll on our sacral center when we're busy, and we think that we don't have the time in our schedule to be able to feel what we're feeling, and we try to override it. We try to bring that energy into the mind and analytically kind of override it mentally, and you can only sustain that for so long before the body starts creating some kind of physical ailment to really get your attention that it's time to feel that thing. And what you'll find is that the more willing you are to feel what you're feeling when you're feeling it, when it arises, within reason, trying to really just let yourself go there, the less it hangs out for very long. So you go through a burst of the feeling and you allow it, and then it moves through you, and then you're on to the almost like the opposite side, or kind of a processing in between, and then the next day you go into the opposite end of the spectrum. So that's why healing can feel kind of like you're going through a roller coaster, and it's because that's how emotions really communicate and run through our centers. So the sacral center is so important because it really governs like our movement. It governs how we view ourselves, and when we don't allow ourselves those emotional depths of really feeling love for ourselves, this is the center that's going to show the truth of that. It's going to say, well, you don't really love yourself, and so it's actually not possible for you to create or manifest a lover that's going to love you truly, because you don't love yourself. And so there's not a permission in the body system to actually receive and accept that love. So it has to start with you. So when people are looking for why they tend to manifest these relationships that really aren't feeling of value or reflecting their true worth, we have to go back to perhaps why we feel that way about ourselves in the first place, and really get clear about what it is that we're holding on to that is not true, that is perhaps out of date, or maybe a really narrow viewpoint of how we view ourselves. And oftentimes this is linked again to that kind of victim energy, and just looking at where do we feel like a victim. And these patterns that we experience in our life, especially emotionally, can be really zoomed in and observed and played around with. And when you do that, you create some permanent change in your space, so you don't need to keep repeating those experiences or the patterns. It's just the willingness to show up and really sit with it, observe, and be reflective will start to generate enough energy where the body goes, okay, well, we don't really need to experience that playing out, that circumstance playing out again, or that partnership playing out again, because you clearly are sitting and listening and observing the whys and all of the lessons and perspectives that come with it. So when we think about that mantra of I feel, however you're feeling is really going to be what you're creating from. So that's why I feel like this chakra is one of my favorites, because if you're not super self-aware and you go into kind of a dizzying, angsty kind of place for too long, you'll start to create some things that are bringing that back to your awareness over and over and over again, until you make a shift, until you start to really allow yourself to feel that angst, get it out of you, and then redirect your attention onto perhaps like desire or something about pleasure, trying to tap into excitement, even if it's fantasy. And so by picking up that vibrational information, that will start to change the way that your second chakra is creating and running your healing energy. So the second chakra governs the hip area as well. And when we think about the hips, this is really a place that a lot of people experience pain. This is a very tight energy that can sort of restrict the flow of your masculine and your feminine energies that are running in a loop from your left side and your right side. So the left side being your female and the right side being your male. And really these energies are meant to be balanced in your own unique way. And what we find is that oftentimes everybody has a bit of a block towards what is actually truly their natural flow. And so we can find pieces of the suppression or the overactivation, whether it be one or the other, in the second chakra. So you can read the second chakra and get a gauge on what's really going on with your masculine and your feminine and the balance. And again, there's really no definite percentage that is correct. Everybody has their own way of choosing what feels right for them. However, if you look at a gendered experience, it's important to sort of validate that just because you're in a male body doesn't mean that you don't run female energy, and just because you're in a female body doesn't mean you don't run a hyper male energy. Everybody's got their own groove, but we're in a collective growth period for many, many years now, where we're inviting more and more female vibrational energy onto the planet. And as that is taking home in the planet and also taking home in our bodies are getting a bit more activated on permission to really generate a higher level of that female vibration. And as that occurs, it really affects the way that we gravitate towards healing work, because when we're healing, we're using both, but really that healing intuitive channel runs on this female vibration. And so the more energy work you do on yourself, or the more you receive and are just open to that and put your attention there, the more female vibrational information, you're going to get activated in your space, and it'll become a higher percentage quite naturally. So the average person who's not quite spiritually aware is typically running a very dominant masculine vibration, which can cause a bit of an imbalance in your energetic field if the natural body is actually inclined to running a bit more female. So we can find the information about what's really going on there, again, in the second chakra. Or you can look at the second layer of the aura, which is the emotional body. So you can look there for some of that information as well, because like we talked about in the root chakra, the second chakra is blasting out and creating the second layer around your aura. So when we think about intimacy, we oftentimes think about it in how it relates to our relationship with others, but really this dominant energy here in this space is how we relate to ourselves. And so our relationship with ourselves is actually the biggest energy in this space. And if for some reason in your childhood you were detached from confidence about yourself, in the sense that it wasn't okay for you to really love yourself, you know, maybe that was translated as a type of selfishness or ego, or it's not becoming of you to be so, you know, self-infatuated, or whatever it might be. Those types of impressions and programming can really limit how much we are willing to be intimate with ourselves. So when we think about intimate, it's really like being vulnerable with ourselves and loving ourselves despite all of our shortcomings, and despite all of our failures, and despite all of our, you know, weaknesses. And so it's kind of where we, in a sense, humor ourselves. And if we can't really humor ourselves, and we go really into the opposite of that, which is the seriousness, then this center really gets worked. This is the center that really just goes poof, and it will just stop functioning fully, and it will start to create a very slow and bogged cycle of energy that really feels almost like you're walking around with these heavy weights kind of carrying you around, like you're, you know, trying to surf through the mud. It's just not a very fluid sensation. So this is a lack of flow on a kind of visceral description, and the intimacy is really not just so much about the physical aspect, but it's also about how we just like treat ourselves, and how we have self-care, and how we're able to laugh at ourselves when we make a mistake or do something silly. And so the pleasure aspect of this space is so tightly connected to intimacy, and whether we allow ourselves to even experience pleasure, or chase pleasure, or have desire for pleasure. And maybe we judge ourselves on the things we have pleasure for, you know, oh, I shouldn't enjoy this thing, but I actually do, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So this is the center that really gets triggered on those things. So when we think about creativity, if you're really feeling like you're struggling to know how to channel that creativity, like knowing that perhaps you're really good at designing your space and creating your environment, or maybe you like to create how you appear to everyone, and you really value, you know, your clothes and your hair and your appearance, or maybe it's how you put your food together, how you cook for yourself, and you put all of your kind of pleasure and joy and creativity energy into that. So this isn't just about being creative like an artist, or, you know, the traditional forms of what we think of when we hear the word creativity, but thinking about what is it that you create every day. You create yourself, you create the work that you're doing, you create maybe the list of like to do things. Maybe you notice yourself like doodling little art pieces next to it. Like there's so many ways that we're creative, and we don't even realize that we're being creative. We just sort of glaze over it and don't really connect the dots. But this is the center that really brings it home for us, that creativity is really what we're doing all the time. We're constantly creating our life. by our energy field. Our energy field is naturally creating communication with nature and with each other and with animals. And so the creativity is really like what we are. We are creator beings. So the guides are always saying, you know, this is about you guys remembering and awakening to the fact that you are creator beings, creating your experience on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis. And so they really honor us and they really help us, especially in our second chakras, hold space for all of this and how we relate with the world around us really limits or enhances how much we're able to create. So when we think about all of the repression that we've had as a species, this is the center where you'll find the details of that information, because anytime you've been repressed, this is the center that really will show you exactly how that's affected you, even on a soul level and not just about this lifetime. So when we think about the effect that our upbringing has had on our emotions and how we relate to our families, and whether that be the family that you've created in your adulthood or the family in your childhood, or both, we've got this perspective of our identity that really comes to mind. So when you've been imprinted as a child of this is who you are and this is how you fit into the family, and we start to really accept those as truths, it becomes really cloudy for us to think outside of that box, to really take our identity and really, make it our own. We're really impacted by the way that other people view us and see us. And so, in your adulthood and you choose to form relationships and you create a family for yourself, again, you've got this implication of what your role is in that family and what your identity becomes in relation to them. And so a part of the energy that's thick in this dense sort of vibration has a lot to do with the limitation and the restriction and the control that kind of comes with those, accepting those as truth, when really we're very fluid. And even though there's aspects of those things that may be true, sometimes we outgrow that, or we change, or maybe we were never really that version in the first place. It's just how other people saw us and kind of projected onto us. So it can be a really confusing energy field to tune into when somebody's holding on to all of those things, and yet you can kind of zoom out of everybody's projections and see who they really are in this center, and who they really are in that energy is not very dense at all. So the density really comes from the projections and this kind of false acceptance that we've had in our lifetimes, which we all have. We've all done that, right? Because part of the human experience. But that's really what creates a bit of this density in this layer. So it's not that this is a bad chakra because it has a density to it, but it's because of this being a space where people sort of develop layers upon layers of things that really aren't actually their natural truth. It's truth that they've been tricked into believing as truth, right? And then you get to sort of pick that apart now that you're aware of it, and decide what really is true for you versus what you've been told to sort of just accept, and you're just subconsciously and unconsciously saying yes to those things. This is the house, your second chakra, where you're going to find all that information. So the association with color of your sacral chakra is orange. And again, like we talked about in the root chakra, doesn't mean that when you read this layer, the second layer, it's going to be orange, but you can certainly give it a healing with orange and it'll work really well. Or if you're having some issues with your sacral chakra and you want to really give yourself a nice awareness of what's going on, what you can do is have this intention to match your entire body, including your crown, to a nice orange color, and really expand that orange into your sacral center, filling up all the way the width of your hips, all the way around front and back, and just filling you up from the inside. And what'll happen is if you bring that same color and you just match it here in your crown up above your head, you'll start to interpret the information between your sacral. So I also like to give it a little bit of a flow up the spine into that space and not just have them as two separate. But certainly play around with this. But this is a fun way to really tune into what's going on and give yourself a reading on that center without getting sucked into the feelings so much that you kind of lose your ability to really see or read from the higher chakras. So you're going to work with all of you. You're accepting what's going on in the sacral center, but you're giving it a different perspective, a higher perspective, by looking at it from up here. So if I create this orange in the sacral chakra and I run it up the spine and allow this same color to swirl here, now when I'm really kind of sitting and just holding space with the energy, I'll start to get a bit of a read on what's going on in that space. And so it's really important that we allow ourselves to kind of play with curiosity and explore this sacral center, because it's a control center for so many areas of our life that really give us the depth of being a human. And so if we show up in these creative ways to really get to know ourselves and know what's going on in these spaces, then the more pleasurable our life and experiences and things we attract into our life end up being. It just is simple. It's science. It's just energy matches itself. So when the vibration really arises and we feel called to drop in and really notice what's going on there, if we allow ourselves to just be fluid and do that, it actually creates less of a tense charge that looks like this. Like usually there's like almost like a bolt of energy that's going like this, and it creates this friction in our space. And the moment we actually like show up and put our attention, it kind of smooths it out, and then the friction goes away, and then a new higher vibration kind of comes in and sets itself and settles into the body. And that's why we get to move forward, creating something new, attracting something more pleasurable into our experience, because we've dealt with that friction charge situation. So this is why the lower vibrational experiences of the emotions, like sadness and grief, don't exacerbate themselves. This is why when you feel grief and you just allow it to move through you, it doesn't create more grief, because the grief is really showing up like a sluggish charge like this. And the more you just allow the grief to just move through you and pass through you, you arrive in a place of non-resistance. And that's where the higher vibrations come in, and they go, oh good, you've kind of settled this intensity, and now we're bringing in this lovely replacement energy to really fuel your center. So now you can go and create your next thing, your next experience, your next emotion, your next whatever. And so it really is a piece of understanding that yes, there are laws of the universe, like law of attraction and things like that, but it doesn't apply to the lower vibrational experiences of feeling. I think sometimes we take descriptions and analytical language, and it can be really hard to understand how it can be one and not the other, and it just feels like everything's hypocritical. And so from my experience of doing this for myself and also holding space for like thousands of people to do this as well, that it does not exacerbate the less desirable shadowy aspect emotions. So don't be afraid to play around with this center. It really can be a transformative and magical experience to really just focus on your sacral center for a good chunk of time, and revisit it when you feel like you're ready for that exploration. It's really important when it comes to enjoying life and allowing yourself to receive the things that you're asking for. If you don't take care of the energy in this chakra, even if you're trying to manifest and creating vision boards and all these, close your eyes and mocking it up thing, your body's not going to let you receive it until you actually take care of the energy that's going on in your sacral and really create a loving relationship between yourself and your energy body and how you feel about loving yourself. And don't forget to really look for some of that societal religious programming or any association with religion that you've encountered in this lifetime. And really just allow yourself to dive into whatever comes to mind. Like for example, when I was doing a lot of healing work on my sacral center, I found a lot of Jewish programming in my space, but I'm not Jewish, and my family is not Jewish, and as far as I know, I don't have bloodline relationship to Jewish energy, but my body was holding on to it. So maybe this was a past life energy that was just really strong, and it may have just carried over into this lifetime, or maybe it's a collective Jewish energy I was working. But either way, that's just my personal example of something I had to work through. Now, when I was born, I was baptized as Catholic, and my parents weren't really super Catholic, didn't really go to Catholic church or anything, but just kind of followed this programming of, you have a baby and then you bring them to this Catholic church and you dip their head in the water and the whole thing, right? But what happened is that in some sort of permission slip, I then was put into a position of accepting this Catholicism as a type of programming. So I didn't really think that much of it. It was never something that was a big deal in my life. But when I went to do energy healing, I kept noticing all these really intense feelings in my body every time I'd go to make really big transformation or big change, almost like I had lack of permission to do so. And it was time for me to really visit some of that Catholicism energy that I had invited into my space as a baby that was actually kind of cast upon me, right? But it was still a permission slip. So on a soul level, I was very aware that that was something I'd have to work on and sort of detach from and accept and allow, and all the layers, right? And so I would really encourage you to just go through all the religions that you kind of know or have an awareness of, and just kind of ask the body, like, where are you holding on to that information? And what you might find is there's quite a bit of just kind of general religious programming that likes to take home in the sacral chakra, because this is where we create from. And there's so much religious programming, no matter what religion we look at, that really wants to define who you are in your gendered body. It wants to really dictate how you use your sexuality and how you display that to the world. And also just where your kind of worship center is because of your emotional response. So how you show up to worship yourself might contrast a belief in some of the religions as well. So self-love is actually something that's not exactly celebrated in religions. They might say that, but then when you look at some of the other programming that comes with it, it's conflicting, and it really detaches you from actually allowing yourself to love yourself in such a high degree that we were intended to love ourselves. And so it's not that all religions are bad or that you shouldn't have one. I'm not trying to put an opinion onto anyone here, but I just want you to look for the energy that's creating any form of limitation in your space, because if you have a desire to experience something or to feel something or to be something, you should have that. That desire is there because that is something that is in alignment with you. And if there's something in your energetic center, in your sacral space, that's saying you don't deserve that or you can't have that, that's where, as a neutral energy healer, I started to witness and observe that these pieces of information were actually holding people back from having really thriving lives, really in their excitement, in their joy, in their pleasure. And everything I've known to be true as far as, my adulthood of being an energy worker, it's very clear that that is how we were meant to experience life here. And anything that doesn't allow us to experience that in my world is a form of limitation and doesn't belong in your body. So again, take it in and take it with a grain of salt and feel what resonates with you and take what you need and leave the rest, all the things. But I would really encourage you, out of all the chakras, to really look for religious programming here in the second. It's very, very rare I come across somebody that doesn't have any. In fact, I think I can only think of one person. So, yeah, it's there, trust me. So, moving on, when we think about the sacral center and we think about associations with like elements, for example, this is a very watery center. So when we think about emotions, it really works with water. So if you are looking for something really tangible to heal your sacral center with, consider that water is actually a very fluid way to show up for healing this space. So every time you're in water is a beautiful time to heal your sacral center. You can take that as far as you want, but this might actually have something to do with why people in their self-care routines gravitate towards being in pools or in baths or hot tubs, things like that. The submersion of water really amplifies the energy in this. It can also really stimulate your creativity and your pleasure and your intimacy. And so just combining all of these pieces of what is sort of symbolically represented in this space can actually enhance the healing in there. So if I'm really looking to heal my sacral center, I'm going to take it as extreme as I possibly can, mostly for the fun of it and kind of just the exploration and really just stepping up and declaring that I'm ready for this change by showing up in a multitude of ways. So of course there's the sitting with and tuning in, like all the things we talked about earlier. There's the orange healing, but also maybe considering eating oranges, eating things that are in the color spectrum of orange with intention to heal my sacral chakra. And even just if there's something that comes to mind, like, oh, I really feel like, you know, these foods really activate my sexual power, or I really feel it in my sacral center, then by all means eat those things, because again, it's not just about orange. It's funny, when I said that, cherries came to mind. You know, cherries are red, but it's like somehow to me my body is correlating cherries as part of sacral healing. So for you, allow something to just come to mind and run with it. But when I really want to play around with my sacral, I tend to consume orange foods, I wear orange clothes, I try to spritz myself with something that has an essence of kind of sexuality to it, a bit of aphrodisiac type of smells, so something really kind of floral but also has a bit of a spice to it. These are things that just activate that center, and again, it's going to activate all these other parts of you as well, but this is really like an ode to this space that just allows your body to go, wow, we're putting some effort and some attention and intention into this space, so let's just generate some energy here. And the more you start to generate energy, the more things will just fly out of your chakra that really don't belong to you, or you're just ready to let go of them. And so this creates a massive change in your emotional body, and sometimes you won't even have to go through the experience of feeling everything in the emotional body. Things will just move and you'll just get activated and get to feel this kind of blissful state of acceptance. And so I would really encourage you to play with what feels good for you when it comes to sacral healing. You know, if you tap into something and you're like, ooh, this always feels like a creative yes for me, or this feels like my kind of pleasure, you know, maybe it's like chocolate and wine or something, you know, whatever it is for you. I really feel like the state of the world that we're in right now, this is a center that needs an enormous amount of healing, because people aren't generally very accepting of themselves, and it's creating a lot of everyone focusing on everybody else, and ultimately that creates further separation, and then we keep subscribing unconsciously to this kind of war dynamic and creating, you know, categories and labels away from each other, and it's not really accepting unity or equality very well. And so this is a center that is really stirring right now as a collective, and it's also interesting that it governs our emotional body. So our emotions are just feeling really extreme, and one way that we can really show up and honor that for ourselves is by giving ourselves a really deep, you know, layered healing in this space, so we can hold space for what's going on collectively without really having to feel the intensity of it. So every time I'm getting hit with a wave of the intensity of emotions, first and foremost, I allow myself to feel them, and I just sit with it and just go into it for a moment and just process and look at, kind of observe and look at and reflect on my own sort of energetic matches to what I'm feeling and what it could be associated with, and I just allow it to move through me. And then I really find some peace in the relief that comes from allowing myself to do that. And I also look at the collective and I say, okay, well, what is kind of the state of the world right now, and what are people really suffering with? And a lot of it is self-denial and suppression and lack of like true self-care and honoring the self. And if you're not living your life every single day operating from a sense of pleasure or desire, then there's a whole energetic system off point that you're operating from, and that's okay, because recognize most people are operating that way, but it's not really how you were designed, and it's certainly not enjoyable. So if you could understand the magnitude of how much that's limited your life experience, perhaps you'd be more willing to get past the fear to create the change, to actually go after what those pleasures are, to go after what those desires are, to really dive deep and allow yourself to create that for yourself. So this is a really beautiful center for magnificent transformation and for really owning who you are, figuring out who that is, and giving yourself this creative space to really create your own story and empower yourself. You know, you get to take the pieces of your life and put them into a story that really makes you feel good about you being you. So be really aware of wherever you slip into the victimhood aspect of your life and give it a new perspective that's still true, but perhaps it's a bit of a higher perspective. So rather than the victimhood, it's, well, what did you gain out of that experience? What did it sort of push you to become because of it? And perhaps now you're a greater version of yourself because you experienced this type of suffering. And so now when you tell your story, it's important to bring it from the perspective of how you are now versus what intensity you went through to get to that point. And so what happens is it brings the body more into the present time and less into retreating backwards into the past. So the sacral is somewhere to really, really pay attention to some of that past energy that's trying to get your attention so you can genuinely process it and move forward in your life. And another thing to think about in just enhancing your sacral chakra energy field and clearing is to think about working with crystals and stones, or perhaps even plants that feel like they carry a bit of a sacral energy. You know, it's interesting that I have this snake plant behind me because I'm a very big plant person and I have lots of different plants, and I think the ones that have like very long centers, like lilies, like there's like a white peace lily that I have that has kind of this yellow kind of phallic looking thing that comes out of the center. I get a really strong sacral vibe from that because of the phallic kind of symbolism. But I also think that pieces like this that sort of represent this kind of almost like pointing upwards, kind of mimicking the spinal column, this plant just feels a bit sacral to me. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I just thought it would be fun for you guys to explore, like what feels like a sacral energy plant for you. You know, I think about maybe the red hibiscus and how it has this kind of yellow center, again, that's a bit phallic, but just the way that the flowers really open themselves and resemble genitalia and things like that. Like their flowers are just like so sacral. So that's fun to think about when it comes to how can I really activate my sacral center. Maybe you go buy yourself a beautiful bouquet of flowers, or maybe you tend to some flowers in your garden. The crystals that really come forward to me are ones that really stimulate a lot of that kundalini energy, and I've found that there's a couple that I really resonate with, and it's just one of those things, you just gravitate towards it and you trust it and it works, right? So For me, I'll share I have Vandonite, which is a really beautiful kind of orangey brown color, and it's a really interesting stone because it's not structurally like a lot of other crystals as far as like the molecular structure. It has more of a square kind of shape. I don't know if you guys can tell from your perspective, but it doesn't have the same kind of points that a lot of crystals have, so it belongs in a different family. Don't mind the dirt under my fingernails. Speaking of sacral, my favorite thing is to just get in the dirt and just be covered in dirt, and it totally gives my sacral center like a recharge. So I know that that's probably root chakra and sacral related, but I definitely did that before our video because I wanted to really tap in, but I've got dirt under my nails. So one more, just this same color again. It's kind of a reddish orange color, and I just really love these for sacral healing. These are just some of my favorites, and I think for you, you're gonna find your own that just really gravitate towards you, and it's important to really play with them and keep them around when you're wanting to tap in and just allow your body to use the energy to move it through you, to really just tap in and use it to enhance your experience. So it's nothing you have to do, but they definitely give me a sense of validation, and some intense energy will start moving through me, like when I'm really feeling like a block in my sacral, and I just hold this guy in my hand, and I actually like to put this in the center of my chakra on my hand like this, and I'll just like, either rest it right on my sacral center, like, like lay it on your body with my hand on top, or I'll just use my hand and just kind of intend that I'm working on my sacral center, and I'll just close my eyes, and what'll happen is I'll start to feel this connection open up with the crystal in that center. So again, for you, it's like feeling into whichever crystal feels like it's doing that for you. Maybe it's a clear crystal, it doesn't have to be color matching by any means. These were just two that came to mind that I know I always gravitate towards when I'm really trying to work my creative energy, or I'm trying to bring more balance to my sacral center. So lastly, we talked about sounds in the root chakra, and we associate the root with Lam. Well, the sacral chakra is associated with Vam. So it's got kind of a funny way that you say it. It's almost like your teeth kind of touch a bit. It's like Vam, Vam. It's got a bit of a f, like a breathy kind of F in it. It's a bit odd, but it's like almost like F-V-A-M in the pronunciation, but it's really spelled V-A-M. So Vam, 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 Vam. It's really wild. But if you keep kind of creating this mantra with it, you'll notice that center starts to really open. Like the petals of the lotus symbol that we see with chakras, they really open up and just love that activation. So don't be afraid to put too much energy here. You really can't overdo it, but there are ways to sort of distinguish whether somebody's sacral is really blown open. And that really, to me, is somebody that's like hypersexualized, wants to be kind of in everybody's space. And sometimes the opposite is true for that as well. There's a different differentiation between somebody who perhaps is feeding energetically off of people and is hypersexual, and so they have to keep having sexual relationships in order to get their energy and to get their needs met. So I'm not really referencing them, but I'm looking at just a wide blown open sacral chakra would be somebody who seems to be sexualizing like everything, like almost like they just can't find their kind of middle space. They're like looking through the lens of their sacral chakra all the time. So I hope that makes sense. So I'm not really referencing the energetic vampire piece of it so much, but I'm looking at just what are some of the symptoms and kind of ways to note the piece of your sacral chakra being super open. Another thing would be somebody who's extremely emotional, maybe overtly, and just kind of dumping energy out all the time onto everyone and not really taking it into their own space and sort of just dealing with it. So you might notice that there's moments where you've spent time with people like that, and that it can feel kind of safe if you're somebody who really resonates with being an empath and feeling, but it can also be really intense to be sharing space with somebody like that, because it comes into your body and really activates it even more. So just one thing to look for is if your sacral chakra gets sort of blown open and opens super wide when you're sharing space with somebody, you are probably translating the fact that your body is unconsciously or subconsciously trying to heal the person that you're spending time with. So if there's something going on in that person's life or their energy field that your body is translating as a need for healing, sometimes it activates that center and opens up just to give some more healing for this person. Now, of course, there's times where you're trying to give people healing or you're trying to hold space for somebody else's journey, and that's going to happen. And there's nothing really wrong with that, but I'm just giving you some ways to gauge how to discern what's going on in your body or in other people's bodies as just a awareness for what the chakra sort of looks and feels like, and some of the circumstances that can cause that. So on the opposite end of that, if it's really closed down and tight, this might be somebody who's been extremely emotionally repressed, or maybe very sexually repressed, or is denying their sexuality, has like no permission to even be sexual whatsoever. This is probably an experience of lack of intimacy or a fear of intimacy. Even genderized fears can show up here, religious fear, family-related fear, like commitment issues tend to cause this tightness and really restrict the energy flow. So somebody who is not really owning their own passion or truth, or not really able to act on their desires or even feel into what they desire, that's going to be a really tight, restricted sacral. Sometimes there's an overuse of the sacral in somebody who's energetically sensitive, and they go through a series of traumas, or maybe just being surrounded by a lot of needy people. And what'll happen is, as a form of defense mechanism in your body trying to protect itself, it'll close down that sacral center just to protect itself from being sort of abused. So there's many different interpretations. So if you sense like, wow, this chakra is really open and feels really good and it's flowing, awesome. If it's like really open, feels a little too open, and you're observing this in yourself, then really like ask the question, like, why? What causes you to be really blown open? Maybe your body's form of safety is to blow open this chakra so you feel like you can feel everything all the time, to get a read on it and sort of discern when something's going to happen. It's almost like a preventative mistranslation in the body, where the body goes, oh, if I feel everything and kind of know where everybody's at in the room or what's going on in my environment, then I'm going to be able to gauge what my next move is, and I can be in a preventative space to almost be walking on eggshells and make sure nothing bad's going to happen. And that is so true for many sensitive people. And so that means that, I definitely relate to that, and that means that I went through a big chunk of my life where my sacral center went from being open and healthy to wide open for my safety and survival, and now it's way too open, and I'm healing everyone all the time, and I don't realize it, and it's unconscious, and I'm feeling kind of sick, and just you go through these spectrums of playing with the chakras, and you realize that not really having self-awareness or what's really going on can actually be less than enjoyable. So those are just things to consider and observe in yourself when you're spending time with other people too. What does my sacral chakra do when I spend time with people I love? What does my sacral chakra do when I'm at the grocery store and associating with people I don't even know? What does my sacral chakra do at night when I'm getting ready to go to bed? Or what about when I wake up from sleeping? What does my sacral chakra feel like? Like, just noticing. Or what about when you're around somebody who has a lot of control, like maybe a police officer or somebody in some form of like administration or leadership, and notice what's going on in your sacral when you spend time with that person. Does it get tight and closed close down and try to protect itself, or does it blow open and try to be submissive or something? You know, there's so many different variations, and there isn't like one definite, this is right, this is wrong, and open is bad and tight is bad. You know, there are no set rules here, but I want to give you some ways to be playful and sort of sense what's really going on, and then also figure out, where is your comfort? What is your body's genuine comfort level with having your sacral center open? You know, because it might change. Like, what's comfortable for you right now, checking in a few months from now, might be a fun exercise to really see how you've grown, or how your body has changed or accommodated or adapted, or maybe just has a new frame of reference, so now there's a different preference. So these are just different ways for you to really tap into this center. And again, I could go on for hours about the sacral chakra, because all these things are governed there. I mean, the money thing alone could be like a full video, and I probably will make a lot of videos on these things, but for now, I think that that makes a kind of a nutshell version of what I was hoping to really teach about the sacral chakra, so you get to really think about it and play with it and be playful and think about how it relates to your emotional body. And again, you can really gauge what's going on in the second layer by just having the intention to read the second layer of the body. So it's not the one that's the closest to you, but the one that's just slightly out. So it's not even that far. I mean, we're talking just a couple inches out from your body. And get a read on it. What color do you sense here? Is there multiple colors? Is there something kind of stuck somewhere in the second layer? Well, know that that's correlating to your sacral chakra. So maybe spend some time with your sensitivities checking in the actual sacral center, but also looking at the second layer. And you just postulate the second layer, and your body will just start to give you that information. Trust me, there's nothing fancy about tapping into the layers. Again, you can use your hands. You can even kind of feel around and go, whoa, something feels like it's right here or something, you know. So everybody's got their own fun way to discern and use your entire body system to gauge. And I think that's super important, to stay playful and receptive, and to have some curiosity in your healing process. So be well, my friends, and the next video is going to be the meditation portion of our sacral chakra. Give ourselves a nice little sacral healing. Woohoo!